Hi, my name is Isabelle Steineck, and I'm an MD from Aarhus University in Denmark. And this is my PhD defense that was held November 13, 2020. The first 9 slides were recorded after the defense, but after 9 slides, it's the actual defense that was held at the STENO Diabetes Center in Copenhagen. So welcome. And the title of today's talk is Insulin Pump and Continuous Glucose Monitoring in Type 1 Diabetes, Mortality, Hypoglycemia, and Exercise Management. And I will go through 4 main points today. And the points are the effects of using an insulin pump on fatal cardiovascular disease, the effects of using low-dose glucagon before and after exercise for hypoglycemia management, the impact of exercise frequency and duration on time spent in hypoglycemia, and the accuracy during exercise of a CGM device attached to the arm compared with one attached to the abdomen. And I will first give you some background, then I will walk you through the 4 papers, paper 1 to 4, then I will give you the conclusion, and then some perspectives. But I want to start one night almost exactly 100 years ago. This night, October 31, 1920, while taking notes on an article for an upcoming lecture on the pancreas, Fredrik Banting conceived the idea that would change not only his life, but the lives of countless others. His idea was to isolate insulin from dog pancreases. And some months later, Banting, together with medical students Charles Best, began working on this idea, and they were under the supervision of MacLeod. In 1921, they successfully isolated the hormone insulin for the first time. Collip continued the work by Banting and Best by purifying insulin, and he also experimented with trying to find the correct dosage of insulin. And he learned how to diminish the effect of an insulin overdose with glucose in different forms. So he was one of the first to describe insulin-induced hypoglycemia. The discovery of insulin by Banting and Best fundamentally changed the lives of people with type 1 diabetes. It transformed the disease from being fatal with a mortality rate of 100% within the first 5 years of diagnosis to being chronic but treatable. This is patient G. Al, photographed December 15, 1922, where he only weighed 6.8 kilos. A couple of months later, after receiving insulin, he weighed 13.2 kilos. And this picture truly shows the impact of this discovery. However, insulin did not cure type 1 diabetes. It transformed the disease from being a death sentence to a life sentence, a chronic disease. As part of the treatment with insulin, there's a risk of both overdosing and underdosing insulin. Overdosing leads to hypoglycemia and underdosing to hyperglycemia. And hyperglycemia can lead to diabetes-related complications. This is a picture of some of the diabetes-related complications. Today, people with type 1 diabetes have a reduced life expectancy compared with people without diabetes, but their life expectancy is increasing. However, with longer life expectancy comes an increased risk of developing complications. Retinopathy in the eyes, kidney damage and dialysis, foot ulcers, cerebrovascular diseases, cardiovascular diseases, and peripheral neuropathy with amputations. And cardiovascular diseases, for example, coronary heart disease and stroke, are some of the potentially fatal diabetes-related complications. According to the World Health Organization's Global Health Estimates 2016, ischemic heart disease and stroke are the 2 leading causes of death worldwide. People with type 1 diabetes continue to experience higher mortality from cardiovascular disease compared with the general populations. Hyperglycemia and hypoglycemia are risk factors for cardiovascular disease. The Diabetes Control and Complication Trial and other recent studies have shown that tight glucose control reduces the risk, delays the onset, and slows the progression of these diabetes-related complications. Lang and co-workers found evidence that people with type 1 diabetes in Sweden with prior severe hypoglycemic events had increased risk of mortality after a cardiovascular event. On the x-axis, you see here analyzes time in years. The blue line shows no prior hypoglycemic event, and the red line shows one prior hypoglycemic event. And the green line shows 2 or more prior hypoglycemic events. So people with type 1 diabetes in Sweden had increased risk of mortality after a cardiovascular event if they had had 2 or more hypoglycemic events prior to the cardiovascular event. Today we can dose insulin with both injections and an insulin pump. Insulin pumps consist of an infusion set, tubing, and a pump. And insulin pumps is mostly used by people with type 1 diabetes in Scandinavia. In the pump, there is only rapid-active insulin, and insulin is given as a basal infusion, and the patients take boluses for meals and to correct for a high blood glucose level. In Scandinavia, there is no extra cost for the patient to have an insulin pump. The pump is free of charge. Earlier studies have shown that insulin pump therapy delivers insulin more accurately than injections. It often improves A1C and gives fewer large swings in blood glucose. And insulin pumps can also reduce severe hypoglycemic events. But we did not know if insulin pumps influence the balance between hypoglycemia, normal blood glucose, and hyperglycemia to such an extent that it modifies the risk of cardiovascular diseases. And this leads me to paper 1. And the title of paper 1 is Insulin Pump Therapy, Multiple Daily Injections and Cardiovascular Mortality in 18,168 people with type 1 diabetes, observational study. And this study was done at Sahlgrenska University in Gothenburg in Sweden. The Swedish National Diabetes Register that we used to get the data for this study was introduced in 1996. It's an internet-based quality register, and data is mostly registered by nurses. And ideally, all patients with diabetes should be registered once every year. And the data from the register are public. So since it's public, I went into the webpage a couple of days ago, and this graph shows people with type 1 diabetes in Sweden with an insulin pump. The x-axis shows years from 2014 to 2020. The y-axis shows the percentage of people using an insulin pump. And as you can see, the percentage of people using an insulin pump has increased over the last couple of years. Our primary aim study with paper 1 was to analyze the effect of insulin pump therapy on cardiovascular mortality. We performed an observational study of 18,168 people with type 1 diabetes. And we used the epidemiological definition for type 1 diabetes, and that is insulin only and debut age under 30 years. We included 2,441 with insulin pump during the study period and 15,727 with injection during the study period. Every Swedish resident, like here in Denmark, has a unique personal identity number. This makes it possible to follow individuals and to link information from various population-based registers. And we linked information from the National Diabetes Register to the cause of death register. And we also used the National Patient Register and the Health Insurance and Labour Market Studies Register. And the inclusion period was 2005 to 2007, and we followed the participants for a mean of 6.8 years. This is table 1 in the article. The table shows baseline data of the subjects. The right column shows the pump group, the middle column shows the group using multiple daily injections, and the left column shows the p-values. As expected, the groups are not balanced for important potential confounders. For example, the mean age in the pump group was 38 years, and the mean age in the injection group was 41 years. In the pump group, there were 9.9% smokers, and in the injection group, there was 12.8% smokers. we use the statistical method propensity score to adjust for all these 36 variables in the table. And here comes the results. This is a couple-of-mile crude survival curve for the 18,168 people with type 1 diabetes who were followed for 7 years between 2005 and 2012. The x-axis shows time in years, the y-axis shows survival in percent. And please note that the y-axis starts at 90% to make the picture more clear for this talk. The blue line represents the pump group, the red line represents the injection group. And as you can see, insulin pump therapy reduces the risk of both fatal cardiovascular disease and total mortality. Here you see the same x-axis and y-axis as in the previous picture. To the left, you see coronary heart disease, and to the right, cardiovascular disease. That is, for example, death in an aneurysm together with a cardiac infarction. Blue is again pump therapy, and red injections. You see fewer events with pump therapy, both for coronary heart disease and for cardiovascular disease. So our principal finding with paper 1 was that insulin pump treatment compared with multiple daily injections was associated with 45% less fatal coronary heart disease, 42% less fatal cardiovascular disease, and 27% less all-cause mortality. What about confounding? What about selection or loss to follow-up? What about misclassification? When we got the result, we thought this is too good to be true. So we carefully looked into the result to see if we could find another explanation for the finding. We had information about and corrected for 36 potential confounders that is related to cardiovascular disease. For example, smoking, age, education, and earlier cardiovascular disease. What about residual confounding? Could there be a confounding we didn't have information about? For fatal cardiovascular disease, an unknown binary covariate with a hazard ratio of 1.3 must be present in at least 60% more patients with injections than the patient with pump therapy to invalidate the significance we found. And we have also done such calculations for all-cause mortality with similar results. What about follow-up? The National Diabetes Register have more than 95% of all known patients with type 1 diabetes in Sweden. So what about misclassification? Yes, this is always a limitation in an epidemiological study. In Sweden, there is a high quality registration. And actually, for example, the death registration has been ongoing since 1752. So what is a possible mechanism explaining the results? Early studies have shown that insulin pumps reduces the episodes of severe hypoglycemia compared with multiple daily injection treatment. And hypoglycemia has been associated with cardiac arrhythmia. So reduction of severe hypoglycemia could reduce cardiac arrhythmia, and this could lead to reducing the risk of death by cardiovascular mortality. We didn't have information on the use of continuous glucose monitors or the frequency of self-monitoring of blood glucose by fingersticks measurements when we did this study. But since 2015, we now have this information of CGM treatment, and we also have information of time in range, time below range, etc. in the register. But when this study was done, this was not available. And we didn't know if the subjects were counting carbohydrates or not. If insulin pumps improves metabolic control, this could reduce micro and macrovascular complications and thereby reducing death by cardiovascular disease. But analysis of updated mean A1C, as well as difference between baseline and final A1C during the study period, did not show significant difference between the two treatments. Again, blood glucose measurement, the use of continuous glucose monitors, and carbohydrates could influence metabolic control independently of the pump therapy. Analysis during the study period. We did Kaplan-Meier survival curve for the first incident of hypoglycemic events in patients with type 1 diabetes during the 7 years of follow-up.
And the Kaplan-Meier analysis disclosed significantly fewer hypoglycemic incidents with insulin pump therapy compared with multiple daily injections in patients with 3 or more incidents during the 7 years of follow-up. So this national observational study of individuals with type 1 diabetes shows that treatment with insulin pump was associated with a considerable reduction in risk of fatal coronary heart disease, risk of fatal cardiovascular disease, and all-cause mortality. But whether the results reflect the physiological consequence of insulin pump therapy, the clinical management the pump users receive, or the educational aspect of having the pumps still remains elusive. Exercise is also associated with reduced risk of death of cardiovascular disease. Exercise reduces the risk of diseases and improves insulin sensitivity. For people with type 1 diabetes, it's however challenging to match insulin and food to keep normal glycemia during and after exercise. Exercise increases the glucose uptake into muscle cells independently of insulin. In healthy individuals, the decrease in plasma glucose mediates a reduction in insulin secretion and an increase in glucagon levels. Consequently, the glucose output from the liver increases and matches the exercise-induced glucose uptake, and thereby they keep normal glycemia during exercise. In people with type 1 diabetes, insulin is provided exogenously by pumps or by injections, and the physiological downregulation of insulin during exercise cannot occur, and this can lead to hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia is a main barrier for exercise. A life preserver can be used to prevent drowning. And glucagon is approved for the treatment of severe hypoglycemia and is now beginning to be produced in a soluble form. We wanted to investigate if a glucagon dose could prevent and/or treat exercise-induced mild hypoglycemia. Can a mini-dose glucagon injection be used as a life preserver in case of exercise? And this leads me to paper 2. And the title of paper 2 is Preserved Glucose Response to Low-Dose Glucagon After Exercise in Insulin Pump-Treated Individuals with Type 1 Diabetes, a randomized crossover study. Our primary aim with paper 2 was to compare the increase in plasma glucose after a subcutaneous injection of 200 micrograms of glucagon given after 45 minutes of cycling versus resting. Our secondary aim was to investigate the effect of glucagon when injected before compared with after 45 minutes of cycling. Methods. Participants included were people with type 1 diabetes treated with insulin pumps with or without CGM. Although they all used CGMs during the study, only to go ahead with the study visit if they had avoided hypoglycemia 12 hours before the study visits. And the participant had a sedentary lifestyle. At the screening visit, we started 2 weeks optimization period of pump settings. After this, the participant went through 3 study visits separated by at least 6 days, and the visits were randomized and participants were their own control. Now I want to show you the 3 visits. And this is an illustration of the visit where glucagon was given after cycling. This is a timeline for the study visit. Visits included a breakfast, an observation period for 130 minutes, and an injection of placebo, cycling for 45 minutes, and an injection of glucagon, and another observation period for 125 minutes. And several blood samples were drawn throughout all 3 study visits. This is an illustration of the study visit with glucagon before cycling. On this visit, glucagon was given just before cycling started, and an injection of placebo was given after the cycling session. And this slide shows the study visit with glucagon after resting. So instead of cycling after the injection, the participant was continuing to rest on the hospital bed, and an injection of glucagon was given after the resting session. For our primary aim, we compared the glucose response to the 2 visits when glucagon was given after cycling and glucagon was given after resting. For our secondary endpoint, we investigated the effect of glucagon when injected before compared with after 45 minutes of cycling. This table shows the baseline characteristics of the 14 participants included in the study. All the participants was relatively well regulated and had had type 1 diabetes for a long time. As you see here, the longest duration of diabetes had had diabetes for 51 years. Now it comes to the results. These two graphs shows to the left plasma glucagon and to the right serum insulin during the 3 study visits. The y-axis is picomole per liter for glucagon and milliunit per liter for insulin, and the x-axis is time in minutes. The blue line is glucagon after cycling, red line is glucagon before cycling, and green line is glucagon after resting. Here I wanted to illustrate for you the different parts of the study visits. You see the breakfast, the observational part, the shaded area shows the exercise or resting part, and thereafter the observational part. And glucagon or placebo was given just before and after the shaded part of the graph. As expected, you see on the graph to the left, on the red line, that there was a high peak for glucagon earlier in the day that glucagon was given before cycling compared with the day when glucagon was given after cycling or resting. And insulin doses given to the breakfast did not significantly differ between the 3 study visits. This graph shows plasma lactate, and the y-axis here is millimole per liter. And the participants cycled with an estimated 50% of VO2 max. The peak plasma lactate levels were significantly higher on both cycling visits compared with the resting visits. However, no significant difference was seen between the 2 visits with cycling. Here's the main result of our study, and it shows plasma glucose during the 3 study visits. And our primary aim was again to compare the increase in plasma glucose after an injection of glucagon given after cycling versus resting. The y-axis is again millimole per liter, and the x-axis is time in minutes. The glucose peak after glucagon was given minus the end of exercise glucose value, sometimes cited as incremental peak, for the study day when glucagon was given after exercise was 2.6 millimole per liter. And incremental peak for glucagon after resting was 1.8 millimole per liter. So the glucose response to 200 micrograms of glucagon was significantly higher after exercise than after resting. The time to peak was similar. For our secondary endpoint, the glucose fall during cycling was reduced when glucagon was given before cycling. Plasma glucose decreased during cycling, 3.1 millimole per liter, but less so when glucagon was given before cycling, 0.9 millimole per liter. But there was no statistically significantly different in the number of events of plasma glucose under 3.9 millimole per liter between the 2 cycling visits. So our conclusion was that the glucose response to 200 micrograms of subcutaneous glucagon was higher after 45 minutes of cycling compared with after 45 minutes of resting. And the glucose fall during cycling was reduced and glucagon was given before cycling, but we found no statistically significant difference in hypoglycemia events. After this study, we started to think, could we do something else to prevent hypoglycemia during and after exercise? Maybe hypoglycemia could be influenced by the frequency and duration of the exercise. And this leads me to paper 3. And the title of paper 3 is Time spent in hypoglycemia is comparable when the same amount of exercise is performed 5 or 2 days weekly. And the background for this study is that according to different guidelines, as for example, the American Diabetes Association Standard of Medical Care, adults with diabetes should aim for 30 minutes of aerobic exercise at least 5 days a week, or a total of 150 minutes per week. However, limited evidence exists on how frequency and duration of the exercise affect the risk of hypoglycemia. So our aim was to compare the percentage of time spent in hypoglycemia between 2 5-day periods with different frequency and duration of physical activity. We performed an open-label randomized crossover study. 26 participants were recruited, and the inclusion criteria was age 18 to 64 years, type 1 diabetes more than 2 years, and insulin pump treatment for more than 1 year. Participants completed a high-frequent and a low-frequent 5-day exercise plan, each involving a total of 150 minutes aerobic and 20 minutes of resistance exercise. Here is noted in red and blue. Between the two intervention periods was a washout of 14 to 40 days, where normal activity level was performed. Here I wanted to show you the resistance training that the participants performed. The resistance training consisted of first 1 push-up, 1 back curl, 1 sit-up, and 1 tricep dips, and then 1 jump, followed by 2 of each and then 3 of each until the time they were supposed to do the exercise expired. The first intervention, red, involved sessions of 4 minutes of resistance exercise, followed by 30 minutes of aerobic exercise for 5 consecutive days. And the second plan, blue, involved 10 minutes of resistance exercise, followed by 75 minutes of aerobic exercise for 2 days, at least 2 days apart. And during each period, they were continuous glucose monitors, and it was the one by Dexcom G6, and an accelerometer that was actigraph, and they also completed an exercise diary. 20 of the 26 included insulin pump treated adults with type 1 diabetes completed study. After each period, the CGM were downloaded to the program Diasend. And here I just wanted to show you what it looks like when you download the data to Diasend. And this participant exercised 10 minutes of resistance training and 75 minutes of cycling. That was the aerobic training. And you can see when he started to do the exercise, you can see that he developed hypoglycemia during this exercise session. The activity monitor were uploaded to ActiLife, a software program, and the participants were instructed to wear a pulse belt during the exercise. And this participant exercised 5 sessions on 5 consecutive days. And this started on a Monday, and the last day is Saturday, as you see here. And then I checked in the diary if I could see increased activity on the time they have noted in the diary. But on this specific participant, it was very clear to see when he had done his exercise sessions. Here comes the results. And this is a graph of all the sensor glucose values in the 2 intervention period. Red is exercise 5 consecutive days, and blue is exercise on 2 days with at least 2 days in between. The y-axis is the sensor glucose in millimole per liter, and the x-axis it shows the days in the study. We found no statistically significant difference between the 2 intervention periods of time spent below 3.0 or time spent below 3.9 millimole per liter. And here you see the percentage, and you see the different periods of observation, 5-session period and 2-session period. And we found no statistical significance between time in range, time above range, or time above 13.9 millimole per liter. And there were no statistically significant difference observed between the intervention period for other glycemic variability measurements. So what are the new findings? Well, we find a similar percentage of time in ranges in the 2 intervention periods. And if this is confirmed in larger studies, people with type 1 diabetes could achieve similar glucose control, whether they choose to perform the recommended weekly physical activity during 5 short sessions compared with 2 longer sessions. The risk of hypoglycemia can also be reduced with the use of continuous glucose monitors. However, continuous glucose monitors need to be accurate and reliable for safe use. And this leads me to paper 4. And the paper 4 was done together with Zainab Mahmoudi, who is an engineer at DTU, and we have shared co-authorships on the first authorships on this article. And the title is Comparison of Continuous Glucose Monitoring Accuracy between Abdominal and Upper Arm Insertion Sites. And the aim of this study was to compare the accuracy of Dexcom G5 sensor inserted on the upper arm and the abdomen in adults with type 1 diabetes. CGM measures the glucose concentrations in the body's interstitial fluid and can thereby provide near real-time glucose data. And CGMs can warn the user if the glucose is trending towards hypo or hyperglycemia. But the sensor for the Dexcom was only approved to use on the abdomen for adults when we did the study. Nevertheless, we noticed that several people with type 1 diabetes, they placed the CGM on the upper arm when they attended our outpatient clinic. For example, here at STENO. 14 adults with type 1 diabetes wore 2 CGMs, one placed on the upper arm and one placed on the abdomen. And importantly, this was the same participants as the one that was included in paper 2. So they did 3 in-clinic visits with 5 hours of Yellow Springs instruments measurements as a comparator. And each visit was followed by 4 days with 7 self-monitoring of blood glucose in free living conditions. And then we did accuracy analysis of the paired CGM YSI and the paired CGM SMPG measurement of the 2 CGMs. And this is just for you who don't know what a Yellow Springs instrument looks like. This is a Yellow Springs instrument, and the other one is the blood glucose meters. So this was the 2 reference glucose that we used in this study. If a CGM is inaccurate, its value both in clinic and in research is diminished. Various methods can be used to estimate the accuracy of sensor glucose meters. Here you see the absolute relative difference, ARD, and you see Clark error grid zones. ARD between the single blood glucose meters measurements and its matching laboratory measurements on the sample is a way to quantify the error in the blood glucose meter value. And the mean of the ARDs as MARD is a measure of the overall meter accuracy. And lower MARD values are generally better than higher MARD values. A Clark error grid analysis describes the clinical accuracy of the glucose meters over the entire range of glucose values. It considers the absolute value of the system-generated glucose value, the absolute value of the reference blood glucose value, the relative difference between these 2 values, and the clinical significance of this difference. And the error grid zones that you see here, A to E, are designed to show increased safety risk depending on the zone and to inform the healthcare provider about the consequences of accuracy reductions. And most SMPGs should preferably be in zone A or zone B. This is the results of paper 4. And this is an illustration of the deviation of the CGM readings from the reference glucose plotted against the paired YSI and SMPG values. This is the absolute relative difference of the CGM measurements from the reference comparator larger than 4 millimole per liter. The y-axis is ARD in percentage, and the x-axis is the reference glucose. And the magnitude of the ARDs depend on the glucose levels. And when we use SMPG as a comparator, the ARD of the arm and abdomen are very similar. When we use YSI, you see, as a comparator, the arm ARD is lower, particularly in hyperglycemia, and the data are from all patients and all visits. So when we use the YSI as a comparator, the overall mean absolute relative difference of the CGM on the abdomen was 12.3%, and the CGM arm was 12%. And remember, lower MARD is generally better than higher MARDs. And the hypoglycemia sensitivity for the CGM abdomen and CGM arm was 69.3%. And when we use SMPG, blood glucose meters as a comparator, the overall MARD of the CGM abdomen was 12.5% and the CGM arm was 12%. and the hypoglycemia sensitivity for the CGM abdomen was 60% and the CGM arm was 71%. And all the p-values from the comparison between the accuracy of the CGM placed on the abdomen and the arm were over 0.05. So what about exercise? This table shows the mean absolute relative difference and median absolute relative difference during the 45 minutes of exercise. And we found higher MAD and median R during exercise. However, we found no statistically significant difference in accuracy between the two sensor sites during exercise. So our conclusion was that the accuracy of Dexcom G5 Platinum continuous glucose monitor sensor placed on the upper arm was not statistically significantly different from the accuracy of the sensor placed on the abdomen in adults with type 1 diabetes. So now we come to the 4 conclusions of this defense. The conclusion were insulin pumps was associated with a reduction in the risk of fatal coronary heart disease, fatal cardiovascular disease, and all-cause mortality. And hypoglycemia may be the main driver for this effect. The glucose response to low-dose glucagon was increased after 45 minutes of aerobic exercise compared with after resting, and the glucose fall during exercise could be reduced by a pre-exercise injection of low-dose glucagon. 3. Performing exercise for 5 consecutive days did not reduce the time spent in hypoglycemia compared with the same amount of exercise performed on 2 days over a 5-day period. 4. The accuracy of continuous glucose monitor sensor attached on the arm was not statistically significantly different from a sensor attached on the abdomen. So what about the future? What can we see on the horizon? What's the perspectives of this? The first pump was large and was designed to be worn as a backpack. Now the insulin pumps are much smaller and more accurate. For the future, I expect smaller pumps with better dosing algorithms and artificial pancreases with both insulin, but also other hormones like glucagon. And since 2015, the use of CGM has been noted in the National Diabetes Register in Sweden, and more data on cardiovascular mortality have been collected since the study resulting in paper 1 was performed. A new study of the risk of cardiovascular disease and mortality, but separating people using SMPG and CGM, will give further insight into the risk of cardiovascular disease in different treatment regimens. So what about paper 2? How can we use this information for the future, except, for example, in artificial pancreas with glucagon? Well, recently, stable glucagon formulation has been launched by different farms, like, for example, Zealand Pharma and Xerix, but further research is needed on other doses of glucagon before exercise, other forms and intensities of exercise, and in participants with either a total sedentary lifestyle or in those that are athletes. For the future, maybe we can see athletes with diabetes using mini dose of glucagon instead of carbohydrates to maintain normal blood glucose levels during exercise. Maybe, but of course that depends on the price of these mini pens, glucagon pens. Based on the results of paper 3, performing exercise for 5 consecutive days signaling does not change time in hypoglycemia compared with a similar amount of exercise performed on 2 days over a 5-day period. But we still don't know whether longer intervention periods would give reduced time in hypoglycemia compared with the 5 days that I used in paper 3. It's something I've been thinking about when I've been reading all these articles about exercise and type 1 diabetes, is that we need more papers on sex-related differences in glycemic responses to different forms of exercise in people with type 1 diabetes. Because the guidelines for carbohydrate intake and insulin adjustments, they could actually be more adjusted to males versus females. But we need more research on this to be sure about that in the future. Well, based on the result of paper 4, there is no need to inform people with type 1 diabetes that attaching a Dexcom on the arm is less accurate than attaching it on the abdomen. However, the accuracy of Dexcom sensor during exercise needs to be improved. users of CGM should be informed about reduced accuracy during exercise. And in February 2020, Dexcom announced that the new version of Dexcom G6, has been approved to be used on the abdomen. So, 100 years ago, these were the stars of diabetes research. Today, we have other stars of diabetes research. Agenten G. Rannen, Kirsten Nørgaard, Birgitte Brock, and Sine Smith. And Agenten, you taught me the structure in the lab, as well as the statistics. And I admire your commitment to your work and the way you always put the patients first. Kirsten, you're an outstanding clinician and a leader and a researcher. You're always available and always ready to answer questions at any time of the day. And I'm so fortunate to have been working with you over the last 5 years. Birgitte, you're an outstanding research leader of the STENO Diabetes Center. And Sina, you're the one purifying the results, like Colip, you know, and you're an excellent academic writer, and I've learned so much from you over the last 5 years. So I would like to thank you so much. I also want to thank all the collaborators I have had during the couple of years. At Hvidovre Hospital, Alice, she was the lab star, and together with the 2 medical students, Jacob and Jens, without them, it would not have been possible to do paper 2, paper 4. At DTU, we have Zainab Mahmoudi and John Bagrap Johnson. And Zainab, she's done an enormous work with paper 4, and helped me a lot with the statistics there. And for paper 1, I would especially like to thank, of course, all the co-authors, but especially Sofia Gudmundsdotter, Jan Cederholm, and Aras Rabshani, that were very much involved with paper 1. And of course, I would like to thank the ones that are given grants, Zealand Pharma and Danish Diabetes Academy. And I would also like to thank, I have been on a research exchange in Portland, Oregon for 2 months, and I would like to thank the people hosting me there, Jessica Castle, Peter Jacobs, and Nicole Tyler. And of course, Jens Uberhals and Trine Rydberg Clausen. I would also like to thank everyone in the Diabetes and Technology group. Some of them are here today. Thank you so much for the time we have had together and for all the conferences we've been to. It's been really, really great. And thank you all the Evas in the back, my friends, and Marike that is here here today. And I would like to say thank you also to and also thank you to my family, my parents, Ingela Rollestad and Gunnar Steineck, my brother and his family, and my sister. I would especially like to thank my father for teaching me the basics of epidemiology, and my mother for helping me develop as an academic writer. But most of all, I would like to thank my husband, Paul, because a PhD is not possible to do without a very supportive husband. And so thank you so much for taking all the care of our children while I've been away doing the studies. So, this was it. Yes. Hej! Det blir fantastiskt! Jag har en tid.